and then he'll be a better employee, but he'll be a better father, husband, partner. He'll be, more relaxed. Like, again, if your physical health is crap, your physical health is crap across all of your thing. And I started realizing that actually we had been training as an organization across those same disciplines. We had been helping our leaders understand their strengths, weaknesses, communication styles. We had been building a whole learning culture of feedback and how everyone gets better, and teaching everyone just better habits and financial literacy.
Bob, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
Good to see you, Cam.
Yeah, you too. So I'm actually curious to talk to you for a bunch of reasons. One, you're brilliant, and I've been able to follow your career and your business and your scale. But you're the first CEO that we've ever allowed on the Second in Command podcast.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the reasons why, because it really ties into your book, Elevate Your Team, but it also ties into your current CEO, who was your COO for years, was one of the very founding members of the COO Alliance, Matt Wool. And I'll dig up his podcast number later, but it's way back. It's probably like episode number 40 or something. And I'll share that in the notes. So curious what got you to kind of start the organization and even bring Matt into the organization. We'll start a little bit with him, and then we'll go into some content to your book, and then we'll go back again.
Yeah. So someone recently, I know you've worked with a lot of different agency folks over the years. Remember recently said to me, how did you start your agency? And I started to think about it, and I started laughing, and they were like, what's so funny? And I'm like, I have a lot of friends with agencies. None of them started them intentionally. They started doing some work, for someone, and they got good. That's the same thing. I started doing some work for a couple companies in this area of affiliate marketing. This one company I was working with called Tiny Prints. It was a crazy growth story. And I was like, look, I think you have an opportunity to do this. And they're like, we don't know how to do it. So I built it for them. The company sold for $300 million to Shutterfly. People went around the valley. They started saying, hey, and then calling and saying, hey, that thing that you helped Tiny Prints do, that was really cool. Could you help us do it? And so I do a couple of them, and then I hired one person, and then I hired another person. And that is typically how an agency goes. When one person gets full, you hire more. When we were about 7, 8, 9, 10 people, I was like, oh, this is a business. I had actually, and Matt may have told this story, it's pretty funny. Matt originally came to me as a business school intern when I probably had 2 or 3 people in 2008, I think it was, where there were no jobs, right? This was the Great Recession. So I got a couple of business school interns, like really qualified people, to come work at my 3-person company out of my basement. And Matt helped with a bunch of stuff. We had a great relationship. So a few years later, when we were kind of bursting at the seams, and I was like, I need help, I called Matt and I was like, hey, do you want to come help me kind of grow this thing? I think this is a real business, and I need someone to run all the client services. And he was going through an existential crisis at his current business. So I like literally hit him on the right week, and he joined, and we've been kind of teamed up ever since.
And that was how long ago? 10 years ago?
That was so yeah, he joined, I think it's probably 11 years now this year. Yeah.
Okay. So over that kind of 11-year period, as the company scaled, you've gone from, literally accidentally starting up a company to having 300 and some odd employees now.
Yeah.
Quite the accident. Well done.
Yeah.
I'm sure the whole time has been quite easy, right? Just super simple.
Problem. Smooth sailing.
You knew what you're doing the whole time.
Yeah.
How, I know your book is called Elevate Your Team, but how have you had to elevate yourself during that 11-year period?
Yeah, look, we had coaches, and probably you told us this, and a bunch of people, but every time you double the business, you'll break half your people and half your processes. And that happened. But at some point I decided I didn't want that to happen. I was like, how could we grow the business by growing the people? I think the last 10 years particularly has been grow the business irrespective of the impact on the people, and just get new people if you burn them out. I actually think that playbook is probably gone for a while now, because also this, I don't think you'll get anyone to work for you. There's societal exhaustion going on. So we really wanted to do things differently. I think you need to, every time the business doubles, you need to reevaluate. Do I want this role? Am I willing to change and get better and do the work to do it? I mean, I had to go from doing everything to trusting other people to letting go. and I'm sure we'll get this eventually, but I would ask myself that every 2 to 3 years, and I'd look at the role objectively, and eventually the answer was no. but for a while it was, okay, then I gotta learn how to do this. I gotta learn how to lead. I gotta learn how to delegate. I gotta learn how to hire. Like if I want to qualify to be the leader of my organization, and we keep doubling every couple of years, then I've got to elevate myself.
And in kind of the elevating yourself, did you have a line of sight to when you were going to elevate yourself to the point that you were going to move even out of the CEO role, or did that happen, because of the growth or the transaction with PE?
Yeah, I mean, it was all. I think it was a little bit of both, right? I realized that I liked, right out of the pathology. I mean, I liked the new and the creative. We always joked that even in his different roles, whether it was VP of Client Services or president, CEOs, Matt always kind of ran the day-to-day business, kept the trains on the track, kept the wheel. And I was out there working on what are we going to do next year? And he was working on how does the business perform this year? And it was sort of a great tandem. I think as you're smaller, those kind of new and exciting things are a big part of the business, right? And the setting the vision, and it's almost more a lot of times on selling people on the future than it is about the present. And then at some point that calculus starts to change. And so when we committed to, I wanted the company to be the global leader in its industry. And to do that, we need to keep growing. And that's what we were all motivated by. But I was also objectively able to look at that and say, that means leading a 7-person leadership team, being in meetings all day, dealing with this compliance stuff and operation stuff. I don't want to do that. So it worked for a few years where I was the CEO, but Matt had a lot of the team reporting to him, most of the team. There were some issues with that. Like I had marketing reporting to me and he had sales reporting to him. And so there were some conflicts we, ran into. When we hired our last marketing lead, we decided to integrate that into Matt so that he could adjudicate the sales and marketing things directly. And then at that point, I was like, I'm the CEO, but I'm on a path to have no direct reports. So maybe it's time to call a spade a spade. And it's probably not the CEO role anymore.
You guys did so many things well at Acceleration Partners, and one of the things that clearly you did well, which is often overlooked, and is the titles. You didn't give Matt the COO title early on in his trajectory in running the company. You gave him a VP title, and it drives me bonkers when I see these 20-person companies with a bunch of C-level people, or an 8-person company and the founders calling themselves a CEO. Did you do that?
You and I have talked about that. If you are not the CEO, if you don't have an executive team that you're managing, and all the roles are performed by you, you might be the president, you might be I don't know what it is, but it's hard to call yourself a CEO when you don't have an executive team to manage.
So did you cognizantly keep him at the VP level for a reason, to chase down the other titles, or did you begin to put those titles and other roles and responsibilities in place?
Yeah, Matt and I have a lot of differences. The one thing we both are is we're not super title focused. So in fact, my title was managing director for years, because I always liked when someone had, you found out the person running the company had a sort of totally understated title. And actually then we started hiring some managing directors in other regions, and then it was really confusing. So I only even gave myself the CEO title once it was confusing to other people. I carried managing director for 10 years. So Matt came in, he ran client services. He was the ran the kind of delivery piece. And then eventually we elevated him to GM, since that was sort of what he was. And I was missing one of the titles when you were talking about this earlier. 4 years ago, he became president, and that's really when we started shifting around the exec team. And then a year ago, he became CEO. So I've seen a lot of people get in trouble with too big of a title. We didn't really have a need. There's debates on whether we still have a need for a COO at the size company that we are, because we have a chief client officer who really oversees all the delivery of services. That's a lot of what a CEO would handle if the core product is services.
Was there any realignment that you had to do with the organization as he moved into these other roles and took on more and more responsibilities? How did you approach that with the team, and to let them know and for you to step further and further away? What did you do there?
Yeah, so with each kind of redoing of the executive team, and we hired someone at some point, I wanted that to be his hires, right? So when we started replacing people that either left or as we grew, it became sort of his hire at some point, right? And sort of his call, because he was building kind of the operating team. What was interesting in the last thing is I had approached Matt, and this was also a year before we did our transaction, but 2 years before the transition, and said, we were on a walk in London, and I said, we're talking about his career trajectory. I said, look, I want you to be the CEO of this organization. I think it's better aligned to what your skill set and where we're going and what I want to do. I'm already spending a lot of time writing and speaking and doing this other stuff. And like, this is really where I see it going. And so we worked on a 2-year transition plan. And we were fully transparent when we were talking to investors and otherwise, and we can get more into that. So 6 months into it, we told our leadership team. So we said the path is to take this to Matt, to CEO, and we actually knew that we were going to do it, a year after we closed the investment. We just felt like bringing on investor, changing CEOs would be a lot of change for people at once. But what we kind of did that last year was we started moving everything slowly. So Matt started leading more of the company meetings. Again, we hired that new director of marketing, reported to Matt. I basically went down to 0 things. By the time we announced it in December, and people were like, it was kind of like the Kaiser Soze thing. Yeah. People were like, so what's going to change? And we're like, really nothing, because if you've been watching what we did the last year, no one reports to me anymore. Matt leads all the company calls. Like, there's like, we actually did it all kind of when you weren't looking. And that made the transition pretty easy.
I do like that it was that kind of 2-year kind of transition period, and that you guys really worked hard at it too. It wasn't just a rip off the Band-Aid, do it. Because I think it's dangerous when a CEO kind of abdicates and dumps and runs away. It can be
Matt had work to do, and he was good about the feedback. And we told him the things we had to work on. We got the feedback. He really like worked on those. Like, it's a different role, and it's a bigger role. And so he did that, and we probably could have done it a little sooner, but I think we were very intentional about it. I also really, and I think he would say this, is I think people thought this is just and someone wrote it in some Glassdoor review, like, this is just a figurehead thing. Bob's going to be pulling the strings and all that stuff. Like, I think people saw very quickly that I stepped out of the room. I stepped out of the meeting. These were Matt's calls. These were Matt's decisions. I think if you're going to do something like this, you need to get the hell out of the way and make it really clear to people, like that they can't have the kids kind of pitting the parents against each other. Like, I knew for him to be successful, and given that I had a big brand persona tied to the business, I would need to get out of the way quickly. And so, I still joined the weekly meetings. I started kind of our 2-day offsites. I started being there for the strategic review, but not the tactical planning day, and making conscious changes so that people really felt like it was different.
Nice.
It was his company.
I know you mentioned that Matt had to work on some stuff to kind of elevate himself in that transition period. And I know that at one point he was involved in the COO Alliance. He was one of the founding members. He was in that for a couple of years, and he was doing coaching, going through coaching stuff. What else what do you think he specifically did, I guess, from a more generic, like, was it coaching and working with consultants and reading books, and then what specifically, were there some specific areas that he had to elevate himself in?
Yeah, and some of it was just endemic to the job and the role and the change. But we worked with coaches over the years. He's worked very closely with them. We worked with you. We worked with a bunch of coaches. There was a lot of reading. He started going to events. He started going to a lot of these things instead of me. He and I actually started a book club for 6 months before the transition. I picked like the 5 books on leadership that I thought were really impactful, and we would read them and talk about them. But I think some of it was also just equally related to the role, right? In terms of, like, his job was going to be to start setting the vision and starting to put, a COO type person is someone who typically the visionary gives them the crazy vision. They're the ones to figure out how it's going to happen or otherwise. I think getting comfortable with putting big things out there, pushing the accountability down to the team, not knowing exactly how it was going to happen, but saying, look, this is where we're going. This is where we march to. Like, you're responsible for figuring this out. Not I'm responsible for figuring it out. Because that's just a difference. I think the other thing that I think a couple of things that he lead to learn, and I think these are some of the reasons why, you know, I love Matt, but you know, Matt is a carry your own bag, book your own plane ticket, you know, you know, kind of person, like spends company money. And I was like, look, you just can't do this. Like, you need to, you know, he started taking over my EA. I was like, you know, there was a lot of things where he was doing 10 one-on-one calls with people. I'm like, you're the CEO of the company. Like, I love that you're running 10 mentorship groups, but like, that's not how you can spend 20 hours a month. Like, you need to start thinking of your time differently. So I think that, as I told him, I was like, you're the only person in the world that I would say this to, but like, you need to be fancier. Like, you know, most people need to be less diva. You need to be more diva. Like I'm the CEO of a 300-person company. Like I'm going to buy the direct flight. I'm not going to deal with my ticket. I'm going to ask someone to change the hotel room for me.
Right.
Like, you know,
I'm CEO, bitch.
Yeah. As I've said to him, I'm like, I literally wouldn't tell anyone of this, but you need to be more diva. The other thing that was something that also, again, I think what's great about Matt, I had the same problem when I learned this, was like, Matt's like very approachable, very easy to understand. Like, I learned it's like the Disney rule. Like, as the company gets big enough, you need to realize you are on stage and you are in costume, and people take every joke and every word you say like as gospel. And I really learned that the hard way. And, you know, I point out a lot of examples, you know, for him of where he would just have to, unfortunately, you have to be a little less casual and, you know, a little, and I learned a lot of that stuff the hard way, where you want to just be you, but there's just stuff you don't realize how people take all of your words and stuff as CEO of the company when you're just trying to be the person next door.
Yeah, I've been telling people for years that sarcasm doesn't scale either. Sarcasm is fine when there's 10 of you, but sarcasm doesn't work when there's, you know,
particularly if you know someone really well, you know, they're sarcastic, right? I think you're used to your team that know how to read you. Other people don't know how to read you.
Yeah, the rest of the company. So you end up making a comment during a town hall and the other 200 people have no idea what the heck just happened up there.
Right. You know, and I think there was some presentation stuff. Look, I had this, particularly with video. A lot of leaders in our company, they start seeing the filler words, and I had to do this for myself. Say, I want you to take that video and go watch it over and over again. And when you watch it, you're going to be really uncomfortable, and then you'll probably realize why you need to stop saying that same sentence or whatever that crutch sentence is. But we have a very learning oriented company, and so I think everyone's really good about feedback. We had someone on our team who was really bad. We started highlighting the umming to people, you know, in calls, and they told everyone to like raise their hand in the call, like if they started doing it, just to like, you know, make them super aware of it. So everyone elevating themselves into that new role like that is gonna have development things to work on. It's just part of it's endemic to taking on a new role.
I love one of the examples was that, you know, Matt had to get better at not knowing how to do everything, and entrepreneurs often have no idea how to do anything. Like,
he asked everyone else to do it because they didn't know how to do it. Yeah,
it's good. I had a friend of mine who called himself the lazy entrepreneur, and he opened up his head office 3,000 miles away from his home so that he couldn't go into the office and see people. A couple of years later, he had 200 employees that literally were 3,000 miles away. And he's like, I have an office of 4 people managing the 300 people in Winnipeg. I'm like, that's genius.
Yeah, look, if it works, it works. Go with it.
Okay, so I want to ask, you mentioned Glassdoor kind of in passing, and you guys as a company ranked very, very highly for one or a bunch of years on Glassdoor, like number 2 or number 12 or something on Glassdoor to work for in the United States. What were the top few reasons why you think that happened?
Look, I think we built a good culture. I also think pragmatically, like, if you don't, we would check in with people. We knew Glassdoor was really important, and we would not tell people what to write or otherwise, but we would regularly check in with people and say, hey, look, if you haven't posted anything in a few years, could you leave an update? And we didn't know if they did or not, but if you look, it's a really important metric, and unfortunately it's totally blind and other people can do it. If you sit around and as your company gets bigger, there'll always be unhappy people. And if you don't have the happy people contributing regularly and you just get the unhappy people, and then what you see happens is there's an unhappy review or a bad review, and then the company like jumps all over it and asks everyone, and then you see 9 great reviews, and it looks like it's trying to kind of wash that out.
Right.
That's why I think it's important to have a regular program of asking people as they come in, or hey, would you just leave a thing on there? So I always had that as sort of a KPI, not what I can't control what people said, but just to ask regularly. I think there are a lot of companies out there that you're just seeing the reflection of the 5% of the company that doesn't like it when the 95% of people love it. But really happy people oftentimes don't take the time to go, post things online.
You're right. One of the things I've tried to do as a kind of a little system is anytime I hear from an employee or customer that they're super happy, I just reply back going, thanks so much. So glad you're happy. And then 24 hours later, I go back and I go, hey, I was just thinking about your email yesterday, which I've already acknowledged and said, I'm glad they sent. And I'm like, just think about that email. Would you mind hopping on and here's the link and leaving us a quick review? I'd love it if you would.
Yeah, look, you shouldn't feel, if you're pressuring people or doing stuff, that's garbage, but you shouldn't feel any guilt around regularly acting people that are happy to tell other people that, and you're not telling them what to say, you're just asking them to do it. We actually had a thing years ago, and then because someone wrote about this on Glassdoor, we haven't done it in 5 years, but people still post because I think some angry person goes back and takes it from another post. We were submitting for a lot of awards, and it was exhausting. So we one time we've had a spreadsheet. We said, look, if you filled out these things, because a lot of them need company participation, mark it off and just check it in, and we will, do a raffle and you can win an Apple Watch. We were just trying to thank people for their time because they had to fill out all these things.
Sure.
We never, and people were like, they're paying for reviews. And I was like, look, it's anonymous. I don't know if they reviewed. I don't know what they said. They could have left a horrible review and won an Apple Watch. It's funny though, this narrative that I was like, we never told people what to say. We never pressured anyone. We just asked them if they feel comfortable writing one. And again, they're all anonymous. So I have no idea who posted what.
Yeah, and I agree. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking happy employees and happy customers to leave a review. You better take you can't leave that stuff up to chance.
In fact, you should probably set a calendar reminder, and once a week, think of who's an employee, who's a customer. Again, because now you're spreading these things over, every week or every 2 weeks, rather than what inevitably happens is you get 1 or 2 bad reviews, everyone goes into a fire drill.
Yeah, you jump
then
on
it just looks like you're trying to, cover that up. So you want to do that before you need to.
You got to bury the body in advance. All right, I want to talk about your book. So Elevate Your Team, and it's funny, every time I started thinking about your book in the last couple of weeks, I kept thinking it was called Elevate. Did you have another book
that
called
was
Elevate?
My original book. This is the sort of sequel. Yes.
Okay, so I was like, wait, there's something else. Okay, that's why
it looks very similar too. So
yeah. The other one was blue with yellow though, right?
Yeah, it was inverse. Yeah.
And your first book was called Performance Partnerships, I think, wasn't it?
Correct. So that was a marketing kind of industry book, and then Elevate was my first it was more of a personal leadership development book.
And then Elevate Your Team, I know you talk in it about 4 kind of core areas. Do you want to touch on those?
Yeah.
Like spiritual, emotional?
So actually both books have the same framework. They just look at it differently. So Elevate was, how do you get better as a leader and develop other leaders by looking at sort of spiritual, intellectual, physical, and emotional capacity? Because I just saw that as the core of all improvement in personal development. And spiritual is not religious, but it's, what are your core values? What are your strengths? How do you show up? Intellectual is kind of your operating system. So how do you learn, plan, execute, get better with discipline once you know what you want? Physical is more like it sounds. It's kind of your mental and physical wellness. I mean, again, we are the same person inside and outside of work. I was saying this before, we're working at home. You're not a disorganized, exhausted person at home, and you show up to be a super organized, energetic person at work. These are holistic kind of life skills. And then emotional is, how you relate to other people, vulnerability, kind of like how you interact with the people and the world around you. So Elevate talked a lot about how to look at that as a personal development framework for understanding kind of where you were out of line, room, otherwise. And there's a lot of feedback like this is great from a leadership development. As I started thinking about how we built the organization, it was because we committed to make people better holistically. Like, how do I make Cam just better? Like, and then he'll be a better employee, but he'll be a better father, husband, partner. He'll be, more relaxed. Like, again, if your physical health is crap, your physical health is crap across all of your thing. And I started realizing that actually we had been training as an organization across those same disciplines. We had been helping our leaders understand their strengths, weaknesses, communication styles. We had been building a whole learning culture of feedback and how everyone gets better, and teaching everyone just better habits and financial literacy. We've been encouraging people to go run races and paying for coaches and things that they wanted to do and their goals, and really like paying people to go on vacation and unplug from work and really try to have that. And then we were also doing crazy stuff around kind of emotional capacity. We had someone come in, and we had employees do TED Talks at our annual event. And then we had someone come in, Philip McKernan, you might know him, and he facilitated this thing called One Last Talk. And so we had 4 employees go up there and give this is the talk if it was my last day on earth that I would give. I mean, A, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. B, like what happened after that in terms of like employees having real conversations with each other and all this stuff. So
Wow.
This really goes through that framework from how do you create an organization that has works on those same capacities versus an individual.
It's funny, Philip. Yeah, I've joked with Philip and about Philip. I call him like the person that I love to hate the most or hate to love the most. Like whenever he talks to me, he ends up like within minutes getting to like the core of the real
soul.
issue.
He looks into your soul and you're hysterically crying within 15 seconds of talking with him every time. I've had him on my podcast. Everyone says the same thing. Like I asked him straight up. I was like, Philip, like, is there like, I understand you're good at your job and you figured out a lot of these things, but there's something deeper in this. Like there's some skill that you have where you just see through it. And he was even saying that he reacts he says people will say something, but their facial muscles tell him like something totally different. And he is very gifted at what he does.
Yeah, he's crazy good at it. I don't think he just sees your soul. I think he goes in and rips it out and then shakes it around and hands it back to you and goes, fix it.
Yeah. Some of my team who's the toughest emotional person said he had me crying ugly in like 15 seconds. Like
Wow.
he's talking to me. Yeah.
Well,
like
the other person who reminds me of him in a slightly different way is Warren Rustend.
Yes.
I've got Warren coming and speaking at our in-person COO Alliance event. And Warren does the same thing to me where I could be at the peak of my game and feeling the best about myself. Right. And I listen to his story. I'm like,
right. Warren does it with stories. They're different.
Yeah.
They're 2 of my favorite people. He does it with these stories about stuff he's done. And Philip just looks right into your soul. Right.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Very different. All right. I want to talk about the kind of the growth that you did with Matt then around those 4 areas. So Matt being a COO, were there some specific things that you helped him or he identified for himself around the spiritual, intellectual, emotional, physical?
Yeah. One of the things that we all did as a leadership team years ago, we did this why training. And it's been like super instructive. Like, I think I really pushed it like that, there are these 9 kind of why archetypes and they really explain more than any of these tests. I mean, Colby and a lot of these things are work style, but like kind of what is the core way that you show up and bring in your core motivation? And I would say it's at the root of almost every conflict. Like when you dig into a conflict and you dig in the why stuff. So I think, Matt's not doing vision boards and stuff yet. I haven't gotten him fully all of this family all the way on board on that. But he also, again, embracing kind of setting those big goals, looking ahead, kind of putting it out there. On the intellectual side, we have just a crazy learning organization. Like people are always teaching, mentoring, coaching. I think, I convinced him eventually to get into OneNote or just other things again that weren't scaling, like that worked when you were a 10-person company, but you're not going to remember this stuff when it's 100. I mean, he was running, I think 10 like forum groups. He started kind of manager forums and was leading like 10 of them at a time. And was
Wow.
just teaching the 5 dysfunction stuff of the team yesterday. So, I think he really got a lot into this. We are a learning culture, and also we've always embraced a lot of we don't want people working to death. Like, we want to have an outcome oriented culture. What's funny is the places that really celebrate heroes hours and all that stuff, they are rewarding like inputs, not outputs.
Yeah.
It's very disconnected from results. The fact that we were remote for so long, but that we already had sort of gone into this, we know our metrics, we know our KPIs. Before COVID, people would say to me, they'd look at me like at 5 heads. Your entire team is remote, like all 150 of them. Like, how do you know they're doing anything? Like, how do you, I was like, well, look, our clients run these programs. The programs have goals. And so we look at, is the program hitting its goals, which meets our financial thing? And are the clients happy? And everyone has on balance kind of the same portfolio of work. Let's say every account manager has 4, 5, 6 clients. So if this manager has all their companies hitting their goals and they're all, net promoter scores off the chart, and they're working 4 hours and the other person working 10, I don't care.
No. In fact, I want to
Yeah.
teach them what the 4-hour guy's doing.
Right. Exactly. What maybe they're focusing on the one relationship that's driving results, and not that they figured out the 80/20. So it just was always very easy for us to measure what good looked like. And in fact, I think that as we got into hyper growth mode, and you and I talked about this before, and just started throwing more resources on things, it didn't actually produce higher output. I think we're in a great reevaluation now where everyone just put more against things and realized the cost of complexity.
I've always believed that the leader's core job is to grow people, right? To elevate people, to grow their skills and their confidence. And I launched a course 2 years ago called Invest in Your Leaders.
Yeah.
And one of the core things I've noticed is that the learner controls the environment. The learner is not going to want to learn until they realize that they either have a need or a desire to learn. How do you get your leaders in companies like a Matt Wool, who's doing really well, operating as president? How do you get him to want to learn to something and not take the feedback defensively? Or is that just a natural thing for him that
I think we really built the culture around teaching people how to get feedback, that feedback was about getting better, that if you attack characteristics in people personally rather than trying to talk about the issue and how to fix it and make it better last time, like that was just always part of our culture. I think the other thing is, again, one of our core values is excel and improve, and whatever you reward, people will do. So I think when you're putting out leaders and saying, congratulations on this promotion, Cameron has just crushed excel and improve, he's taken all of our courses, he did this, I think people start to see that the people stepping up and the people getting promoted are the ones that are invested in the learning and getting better. And that if the company is growing 30 or 40% a year and you're not going to do any work to get better, you are going to be in a precarious position pretty quickly. So I think it actually works better show, not tell. I think what people saw was like, hey, maybe Matt was resistant to some of this stuff, but he really started embracing the stuff and learning and got a coach. And I think then they can see the results that he was getting, and they're like, look, I got to do the same thing if I want to qualify for that role. In a company growing at 20 to 30% a year for a decade, if people aren't getting approximately that much better every year, they will be consumed by the growth line pretty quickly.
Yeah, and when you hit that kind of like I've read and talked about that a good leader can only go through 2 doubles in the size of the company before they're out of a job unless they've continued to double their skills.
Yeah.
At what point do you know that the person can't continue to grow, and do you get rid of them, or do you just move them into a role that they're well suited for at the skill level they have, and the company scales but they now stay stagnant? Is that okay?
I have a graph in the book that was actually part of, I won't ruin the opening, a shower epiphany that sort of changed everything, on showing like how fast does the person improve relative to the growth rate of the company, and that sort of predicts where you're going to be in their ability. This is something I had to learn the hard way. I think if people they want it, GWC, get it, want it, and have the capability, they can keep going. Like we have, Sarah Days on our team, who was hired an SEO copywriter and now leads a team of 200 delivery people globally, as the chief client officer. Zara's just a voracious learner and like will just, developed into incredible leader, like all of these things. So I know people when hit the wall, I think when they stop getting it, right? They stop wanting to do the work. What I can tell is that the best people that I've ever had on my team, you're always giving them feedback. So you and I will sit down for a quarterly thing. Cameron, here are the things you need to work on. We're not talking about those next quarter. You go and you work on those and you improve those and you make new mistakes. When you start having the same conversation and they're like, and you're like, I always say the worst, there's people who clearly don't want the feedback and aren't going to improve. Then there's people who listen intently and don't improve. And then there's people who listen intently and improve. The second group is the worst. The first group, you know what you're getting. The second group goes, yep, I get it. I hear it, whatever. And then we're 3 months later talking about the same thing again. So as soon as I start to see the same issue and we're not making progress, I sense that the end is near. And to the second part of that question, I got advice on this. Look, if you're getting better 30% a year, a group or a division, and let's just say there's a marketing manager as the head role to start, well, then eventually you're going to need a marketing VP and a marketing director and a CMO. You might ride up a couple of those things, but it might be unrealistic that you can ride that fast. Your ego needs to let you step aside and be like, I just moved from, analyst to director in 2 years, but the company needs a VP. I think a lot of those people really struggle when they're homegrown and that person comes in. And there should be a great role for them. They've been promoted twice, but the fact that they're not it anymore. I had a guy say to me, I was like, I'm running into this. I said, what did you do? He said, I had to part ways with almost all of them. And to a T, 2 years later, they would come back to me and they would say, you were totally right. I was over my head. I couldn't see it. My ego got in the way. So it's 50-50. I think some people realize, look, I had a friend who had a bookkeeper who turned into a controller and he needed a CFO and the company was growing 100% a year. And he knew she was not the CFO and he made her the CFO and she made $1 million mistake. And that was his mistake. And he says that was on him. Like just because she wanted it didn't mean she had, the capabilities to be a CFO. And by the way, it's unrealistic to think that even with Miracle Grow, that someone can turn into a controller to a CFO in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I've had those discussions with some leaders and kind of following some of the science of persuasion, where you sit down and you kind of convince them that they're going to enjoy reporting to this new VP and getting more time from somebody versus the 5% of my time they're going to get 100% of getting to report to this new leader and grow with them, right? And sometimes
and what they might not understand, and we've said, like, look, like you need a mentor. I don't know enough about marketing to help you anymore, but if you see what happens when we hire a rock star person that you can learn from, you're not the CMO now, but you could be the VP of marketing who gets a CMO role elsewhere in 3 years.
How do you decide, or do you distinguish who your A players are, and do you give more time to your A players than your C players? Or do you have any thoughts around? We've done
different things. Like I would run twice a year, like leadership retreats for kind of our up and coming leaders, trying to get them leadership training and reps before they needed it. We actually also just really relaunched a whole thing, like a HIPO program, like our high potential, highest performers, highest potential. We're all identified across the company, and they're going to get like special training and leadership access. And one of the rules of that program was they don't belong to any team, which is interesting. They're like, if they're tagged as this, then we are all responsible for making them better. And you should not restrict them to your, if they're tagged as one of the 15 highest potential people in the company, you should not look at them just from what's available on your team, but what's available on any team.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because it's hard when we know we've got these A players and we kind of just let them do their thing, and then we keep working hard with the underperformers to grow them and elevate them without elevating the A players, and it almost seems to be a shame.
Yeah, I look, we love to invest in people and train people. And I was really struggling years ago because we would hire in classes mostly for very similar jobs. And you'd hire 10 people and 8 would be doing great at week 2 and 2 were totally struggling. By the way, if I don't have the data on this, but I would tell you that if we just statistically made a decision on how someone did in their first 2 weeks, I think it'd be right 98% of the time. I think people who start off horribly, and people are like, well, you didn't train them right. I'm like, but once you're in that deficit, there's almost no coming back. When you start off when you can't do what we thought you hired you to do, and our training is to get you to average. So we made the decision years ago, we're not going to train to get anyone to average. Training should be high potential, move them to the next level. I don't want to retrain you for the job that we thought we hired you to do that you actually can't do. That feels like as much as I want to invest in people, that feels like a really bad use of limited resources.
Yeah, agreed. You, when you went through this private equity deal, so you sold to private equity or sold a portion of the company to private
Yeah,
equity?
it was a portion growth investment. Yeah.
And when you did that, you mentioned to me before we went live that they were really happy to see that you had a solid second in command. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So first of all, in the deal and all the details and stuff, right? Founder usually doesn't know anything, like, and going to say stuff. But we actually were in the middle of that transition, and we said, look, Matt runs all the day-to-day business. He's going to be the CEO, and they were totally on board with that. And I think when you have these deals, one of the fears of the private equity firms, I think, is that the founder is going to leave, right? They roll in a bunch of equity, but they don't necessarily have to stay, and they're going to get bored or they're burnt out. And so having, mid-market growth private equity firms are not in the replace the CEO business, right? That tends to be bigger ones. They are kind of betting on the team. That would be like a worst case scenario. But in the back of everyone's mind, like, that's an insurance policy. So when the insurance policy already exists on the team, that's very attractive to the investor, right? If they know that there's a number two already on the team who could be number one, I think that makes the deal in the company much more marketable, because the thing that they are always worried about is founder concentration and founder, risk. And if something happens to the founder. So, I actually, they were totally on board. And in some ways it's like, oh, we want the person who's stepping up over the next 5 years, who can have, massive wealth creation, life-changing opportunity to run the business.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Before I ask you my last question, I wanted to first say thank you as well. Thank you for investing and elevating Matt, because of him and two others. It was Zach Obrant from Scribe and Zach Morrison from what's now called Tenuity. Though they were the three founding members of the COO Alliance, and because you decided to put your money where your mouth is to grow him, and you invested 20 grand in him just to come and get training.
Is that what we paid? Jeez.
Yeah, plus some coaching, and I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, but thank you for doing that. Thank you for caring enough to elevate him. So I want you to roll the camera backwards in time and go back to like the 22-year-old Bob Glazer. I don't know if you were Robert Glazer back then or Bob Glazer back then.
Probably Bobby.
So let's go back to the Bobby Glazer, 22-year-old. How would you tell yourself to elevate yourself back then? Something that maybe to be true today, but you wish you'd worked or focused on it earlier.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Someone was reading my bio before speaking about it recently, and I realized that every single thing that they had said was what I would call like ACV, after core values. So coming out of a leadership thing with Warren almost 10 years ago, I was like, wow, I think I'm very values oriented, but I don't know what my core values are. And I went on this kind of journey. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. And now I built a program, and it's a course, and we train all our leaders on understanding their core values, because to me, that's becoming the authentic type of leader that you want to be. I think when we all start leading, I used to say, and when I present this to our team, it felt a little bit like a patchwork quilt. Like we take the things that we liked from other leaders, we try to do the opposite of the things that we hated, and some of it's just not us. And so I think at 22 it was like trying to copy best practices of other people. I think after going through that process, I was like, look, here's what I'm going to be, here's what I'm going to do. And, when I'm going to hire someone for my team, I'm like, look, this is why you'll absolutely love working for me. And this is why you absolutely love hating working for me. And they're fundamentally the same thing. Like, I'm just going to tell this is who I am. Yes, I can change a little bit and I can evolve, but I'm not fundamentally going to change. I think if I had that clarity and conviction earlier, I would have made better decisions. I would have done things that were more authentically me. I think a lot of times I could see something, you and I could see something that Warren could do, but it's not us, right? It's Warren. And we try to copy it, and we realize we're leading by kind of pretending to be a bunch of different people and not ourselves.
I love that. Super authentic as well. Bobby Glazer, Thank you so much for sharing with
Cammy
us on the
Herold.
Second Command podcast. Exactly. Thanks very much, man. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
You're balancing centralization and decentralization. You're balancing the need to standardize specific processes and policies so that you can scale. And there is an amount of diversity that you want to retain because it's what gives the organization its lifeblood.